Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech Podcast. This is episode 60. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. Thanks again for downloading this episode this week and giving it a listen. And this week, after spending a few weeks in some controversial topics, this week we're getting back into some kind of fun technology things to discuss. And the first thing that I want to throw out is an article that I came across. This was put out by OMG Ubuntu. And for anybody using Ubuntu out there, I came across an app that allows you to cast video from your Ubuntu desktop to your Chromecast. And I have never really seen this before, and I always wondered if it was possible. And the name of the app is MKChromcast, and it's 0.3.7 is the current version of that. It basically allows you to stream video to any Chromecast-equipped TV or cast-ready speaker set. So before I switched over to iOS for some music-related apps that I needed, I was a big Android user, and literally, weeks before I switched from my Android phone to my iPhone, I had been given a Chromecast, and I really enjoyed, using it for a couple of different things. Mostly, I used Downcast at that time to listen to podcasts, and I thought it was kind of a neat thing to be able to just shoot the podcast over to the Chromecast and play it on the TV as I was working around the house. And at that time, Chromecast had only been out a few months, and there wasn't really a whole lot of applications that were available for it. There were certainly some out there that I was maybe I just never used those apps in particular. But in this case, I think Chromecast has definitely been out a long time now, and I'm really kind of interested. I don't have my Chromecast anymore, but for those out there who might be interested in doing something, this app I think would be a great resource for you to be able to send video from your Linux-based computer over to your TV. So I just wanted to bring that up in the show, and again, that's called MKChromcast. And CHROM cast. And it's available for Ubuntu. I'm sure it's available for other things now. I haven't looked into it. I just came across this article this morning as I was getting ready for the show, and thought I'd throw it out there for you. Just a quick little app pick for you all out there. And if you've been listening the last few weeks, you have probably heard me mention that my schedule was really jam-packed here for the last probably month and a half, 2 months. And we're starting to wind down from all of that now. And I'm looking for the next project to get into. What should I get into next? And, a lot of times I've reviewed Linux distributions. I've gotten into, I review Mac apps or iOS apps, or sometimes some Windows news, that type of thing. Pretty much covered the spectrum over the last year or so. Did a lot of Google stuff, did some ham radio stuff. And if you got any ideas out there of a project that I can get into, maybe learn about, that's what this podcast is all about, is sort of the journey of me learning about new technologies and sharing it with an audience. So if you've got ideas out there, send them my way, and I'd be curious of what some of the listeners out there think I should get into. And if somebody says Linux from scratch, I'm going to scream. No, I'm just kidding. I've actually thought about Linux from scratch from time to time. It's sort of one of those projects that I dream of when I have hundreds of hours to get into, but I don't think that's quite for me at this point in time. Although it would be fun to kind of tackle that, and I've looked through the Linux from scratch documentation several times, and I've almost started several times, but haven't gotten there yet. So if you got any technology related things you'd want me to talk about or go over, send them my way. anything could be anything from computers to other technologies out there. This week's show, though, getting back into one of my favorite topics to discuss. Ever since mid-January, I've been following the SpaceX launch schedule, and they have pretty much nailed it since they had their issue last September, and have been very successful since then. They have been on quite an aggressive launch schedule. And if you look at, if you go to Spaceflight now and you check out the launch schedule, pretty much SpaceX has a Falcon 9 launch every 2 weeks from now until the foreseeable future. They're doing 2 a month, basically, from various locations. And that's all great. Those things you've heard me talk about in the past, that these are kind of fun to watch, because you're seeing rockets return from space and land on these autonomous spaceport drone ships out in the ocean, or even now returning back to land at the Cape Canaveral Kennedy Space Center. And so they've really honed their craft. And I actually use these videos as an example to my students on how to get over, making mistakes and doing things that are really difficult, and just iterating and changing and really pushing through the difficult moments. And so every launch this year, I believe, that they have returned successfully the Falcon 9 booster, and also they have successfully reflown a used Falcon 9 booster, and they plan on doing that more in the future. And that's not news, though. That's really not. This is sort of just leading up to what I want to talk to you all about today. Over the last few months, actually last few years, I'd say, but especially the last few months, there have been rumblings of the Falcon Heavy maiden voyage, and that's the largest rocket that will currently be available when it launches sometime this summer. And that's something that I'm really excited to kind of watch. Just something new. Basically, it's got 3 Falcon 9 rockets, so 27 engines, and has the ability, I think, to launch something like 54 or 56,000 metric tons. I could be off on the numbers there. I'm not really up to speed on that. And for the last basically few years, there's kind of been a running joke that the SpaceX maiden voyage for the Falcon Heavy will be 6 months away, and it seems to always be 6 months away. Well, just recently we are hearing rumbling, so to speak, of test fires happening in McGregor, Texas. They actually tested the center core of the Falcon Heavy, and now they're testing the side cores of the Falcon Heavy. So we're getting closer to that maiden voyage that should happen once upgrades are complete in Cape Canaveral. They are basically, what they're doing is they're taking probably one of the most famous launch sites. It's 39A at Cape Canaveral, basically where the Apollo missions took off from to go to the moon, and the launch site of many of the space shuttles also took place here. And just recently, SpaceX took over at 39A, and basically they're going to upgrade and make modifications so that they can launch Falcon Heavy from this site, as well as a few other locations for them as well. So they're making these modifications, and they're also building new landing zones. So basically, if you've ever seen the YouTube video kind of showing a demo flight of a Falcon Heavy, it's pretty awesome to watch, even as it is animated. The Heavy launches in the 3 rocket configuration, and basically gives the ability to launch really heavy payloads into space, which is kind of exciting. And then, just as you would see a single Falcon 9 rocket, the boosters return to either land or sea. That's what's going to happen with these 3 cores simultaneously. You're going to see 2 of them return to land at Cape Canaveral, and the center core should return to one of the drone ships out in the ocean. It's going to be a kind of a great sight to see, and I'm curious how they will video it. Their videos have gotten much better recently. In fact, just recently, there was a video that I watched, the last launch, I think it was NROL 76. It was a launch for the National Reconnaissance Office where they launched a satellite into space, but they didn't go, they're not allowed to show everything that's happening because a lot of it is classified. But they had a video camera from the viewpoint of the ground looking upwards, and the camera followed the booster from separation all the way back down to landing, and it was probably some of the most incredible video footage I've ever seen. It was absolutely beautiful to watch, and highly encourage you to check that out. It's NROL 76 SpaceX launch. Really goes to show you how much work and these small changes that they've made over time to sort of perfect these landings on a scale that just blows my mind on how accurate they can be with fuel margins and everything else that goes into these landings. To me, they're not getting boring yet. In fact, I can see the changes that are being made and the incremental things that are happening there that really pushes SpaceX forward. And I'm looking forward to the Falcon Heavy. Going to be the largest rocket on Earth, basically, and it's going to be very similar to the Saturn V. That's the only rocket that will have delivered more payload to orbit at that point in time. And then, we haven't seen specs on the ITS, the ship that they want to build to go to Mars, but that's going to be even larger than the Falcon Heavy, which really just I think is a far stretch, and hopefully we'll see that over the next couple of years being built and tested, and we're a long ways out right now, and to see if that ever comes to fruition, but we're making progress, and finally things are happening here that we haven't seen happen in a long time. We're seeing changes being made to our space program and the technologies that are used behind it that are just really inspiring again. And, I remember growing up and seeing the space shuttles launching and just being in awe of everything that goes into those type of launches. And now we're seeing these newer modern rockets happening that are sort of almost science fiction like, and just imagine. I just wonder what it's going to be like in 40 years. What is the technology going to be like to get us into space 40 years from now? And it's really fun to watch and see these steady improvements month after month, year after year. So I'm really looking forward to the future and next few months, seeing the Falcon Heavy launch, and then where it goes from there. You never know. At the same time, what I was also doing here, as I'm following the schedules of all these launches, you heard me earlier talk about the drone ships that SpaceX uses. And they have some really interesting names. The first one is called Of Course I Still Love You, and the other one is called Just Read the Instructions. And if you're not sure where those names come from, they're actually from a book that is in the Culture series by Ian M. Banks. And I was really unfamiliar with the Culture series. I've always been a fan of sci-fi, but I really, to be honest, wasn't aware of this series. It's actually a 10-book series that's out there. And the name of these ships, Of Course I Still Love You and just read the instructions. That came from the second book of the series called The Player of Games. Now, what a lot of people say when I'm reading the reviews about the book is that this is actually a great introduction to the Culture series. And as I read through some of these reviews, and I'm curious if I wanted to give it a shot or not, the reviews say that, you don't really need to listen to book one in order to have a good experience with book two, which is called The Player of Games. And that's the book that if you wanted to follow up on and learn where these names came from, The Player of Games is the book that you'd want to read. So I just jumped right into the series, and I don't normally do this. If I start a series, I'd like to start with the first book. And I knew nothing about the Culture series, what it was about. I just decided to jump right in, so the book itself, I downloaded the audiobook from Audible. And basically the Culture is like a human-machine symbiotic society. And in this particular book, there are these great games that are played throughout the universe. And there are many great game players. And the main character, his name is Gurgay. Basically, he's a master of every game out there. He's spent his whole life working on all of these games, and he's won some, he's lost some, and he's really sort of kind of bored with his success. And he comes up with an opportunity, and he's sort of pushed in the direction of playing a game which is basically across the universe in a uncharted area that is unfamiliar and not well known by the culture. And as I first started reading the book, and I won't give any spoilers away, but as I first started reading the book, it sort of reminded me a lot of Ender's Game, if you've ever read that book. But as the book went on, it was much different than Ender's Game. And the book was I think I gave it 4 stars. The story got about 4 stars, but the narrator is absolutely incredible. In this book, I gave the narrator 5 stars as a review for this book. The narrator was really great, and encourage anybody who is a fan of SpaceX to give this book a listen. Is the one that I listened to. It's written by Ian M. Banks, narrated by Peter Kenny. It's about 11 and a half hours long. And I just popped it in on my commute to work this last week. And really, for a sci-fi story, it was a really great story. And one of the things that I sort of had to go look up, I didn't realize, I wanted to know when this book was released. The audiobook was released in 2011. And I went and looked this up, and I believe that the original release date of Player of Games was 1988. And that really surprised me because it didn't feel dated at all. The story was so well written that you had no idea really the time frame that it was written in. It does take place in a futuristic setting. But, things like, when I go back and listen to Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy, there's a lot of there's a lot of little nuances that you pick up on this book being and feeling dated. Didn't get that with this book for some reason. So I was very surprised by that. And it does kind of make me want to go back and read some of the other Culture series. I may do that in the future. But I'm on to another book already, which I may talk about in the future. So that's The Player of Games. Definitely the inspiration for Elon Musk and naming some of the drone ships that are recovering these rockets. And I also learned that the ITS ship, the vision for the transport ship for bringing people to the moon and Mars and other places, that right now has the name Heart of Gold, which many of you might recognize from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I love the fact that these names are being used for real ships that are coming out here in the future. I always loved how the Space Shuttle Enterprise was named after this, the Starship Enterprise. It's cool to see a tipping of the hat to some of these great authors and creators of the science fiction universe. So definitely suggest, if you're interested in that type of stuff, to go check out some of those books, the Culture Series books. I know that I'm going to be reading some of them in the future as I jump back and forth between some of these books. So just a quick episode today about a little bit of Ubuntu stuff, a little bit of SpaceX stuff, about the Falcon Heavy being tested. I want to get back into some more technology related things, as far as maybe reviewing some apps or trying out some more Linux distros. And if you have any suggestions of what I can jump into next, now that things are winding down a little bit, I can sort of jump in feet first on a few things and really keep creating something new every week. And so I try to mix it up as best I can, so I'm not talking about the same things week after week after week. But I would encourage people to write into the show and give me some things to work on. So that's going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.